I haven't quite reached the phase in life where I need to have a full estate plan, but when do you think people should start thinking about it? Are there any steps or mindsets that people should?
Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us to our few podcasts. This is, again, season 3, episode 3, and we have a wonderful guest with us today, but I'm Robert Schein, your co-host with Madison. Hello, Madison.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Valerie, for being here with us. I've heard you speak a few times now, and I always learn something new, and you always have great insights, so I'm excited for this episode.
So we have with us Valerie Powers Smith, who is not only my personal estate planning attorney, but she's a dynamo everywhere from East Coast, left coast, right coast. She does business everywhere, specifically in California here for us. On the estate planning side, that's her one of your focuses and many skill sets. And we're going to dive into sort of who you help, how you help them. But I think what we wanted to do for this episode specifically, especially in my wealth management practice, as we see through our day-to-days in and out, we actually just had a call with a client on the East Coast in New York, Upper East Side, and, super high net worth and still dealing with the estate, for the future. And trying to figure out, it's almost like a chess game, right? And so if you could take the chess, that's what Valerie does. She takes chess and makes it checkers for everyone to understand back at home for us, because it becomes super complicated. The more wealth you have, the more decisions you have to make. And sort of you have to go through that decision-making tree. And we were sort of helping her walk through that process. And, I think one of the key notes here is that she's working at it. I think the most important thing is that she was actively rolling up her sleeves, working at it, working with her estate planning team. And it's a process, right? The estate planning world as today, the rules of the game as we engage could change tomorrow. And so that's why, I know with you and our personal estate planning stuff, we make it sort of like a safety valve, right? So we can change our estate planning as we review it all the years as our family grows up, and so that you're here to help us with that, and we thank you for helping our family through that, not only today but all the years in the future.
My pleasure.
So today's episode, we're specifically going to dive into estate planning and sort of all the issues with it, whether incapacity or not planning ahead. Again, it's not one day; it's day one. So if you at home haven't taken a look at your personal situation, either financially speaking, we can help, but as well as from an estate planning review, your will, your trust, your powers of attorney, medically speaking, especially in California. Our daughter went to college at 17 years old, and at 18, she's in the doctor's office, and we want to know what's going on. We call ahead, and they basically say, oh, we can't talk to you because she's 18 years old. And it's like, you don't think about this stuff, and it happens. Life comes at you. And so that's why you need people and partners in your corner, and you build your team of support. And that's why Valerie's here is you've helped us every step of the way, and that's exceptional. But we're going to talk about celebrities, right? So if it happens in your own personal life, yes, that for everybody, but celebrities who have the money, who have the fame, the fortune, who have the partnership around them, to, the team of advisors that are help them protect themselves for the future, protect themselves, protect themselves against their family and creditors and all the other fun stuff. And they have failed to plan. And there's some really great, we could keep doing this episode every year, but today we're going to talk about very specific cases. So let's just talk about Beach Boys. I mean, everyone knows them. Everyone knows Brian Wilson. And that's been a huge part of our whole culture. But on his own kitchen table, he didn't take care of the proper things from an estate plan. What happened there?
Well, I think it's kind of like what often happens with married couples. I find there's a lot of resistance in planning because it's like, oh, well, we have each other. And that could be in the fiduciary roles, or that could be how they own things. And even with children and one parent. In that circumstance, he declines to the point where he no longer can manage himself and his own affairs. She then steps up and is taking care of it as the wife. She then dies before he dies, and there's no one in a named document to succeed her. And so my understanding was that he had everything financially in a trust, so the trustee named as a successor would take over, but that there was no one to deal with his personal affairs or his healthcare decision-making. And when you have a gap there, Your only alternative when someone doesn't have capacity anymore is you have to petition the court for conservatorship. Most people now know what that is because of the whole Britney Spears saga. And I hate to sensationalize it, but it's a learning moment and a teaching moment when something like that's in the news. And so that's not the greatest example of a conservatorship. We do them all the time when there is cognitive decline. It could be someone's born with an intellectual disability and they're never going to have capacity to manage themselves. When you said, your daughter turned 18, all of a sudden she knows everything. Well, just because someone who has an intellectual disability turns 18 doesn't mean they can suddenly manage their affairs as an adult. Similarly, we never know. You see more and more cases. Look at Bruce Willis. He's not elderly, but now because of his frontal lobe degeneration, he no longer can manage himself. I don't know if he had, but he's got a very dedicated wife that's taking care of that. And so the whole point is people not wanting to deal with death is huge. I think sometimes people don't want to deal with incapacity because it seems like a weakness. You really need to get that in place. Because yes, your spouse is going to step in. But what if you travel together and something happens and that person's no longer able, or there's incapacity that happens at the same time? And so these healthcare directives and financial power attorneys are really important instruments where you can lay that out. I think also if you have adult children, the dynamic that comes up when either both are incapacitated or one dies and then the surviving parent then starts deteriorating, and the kid that always shows up, we all have it in the family. Not everyone is as lucky as your family that you guys band together. There's one that shows up, and then when mom or dad dies, that kid finds, him or herself under fire because what did you do? Why were you managing this? What did you do with the money? And so I think that you
see that a lot.
Yeah, those documents are really important where you can be giving instruction. You can be doing a letter of intent. And you can give me or other attorneys like me tools to say, no, you told them that this is what you wanted in terms of the management if you ever lost capacity. And so you take care of holes. You hopefully can deal with litigation concerns. And then you also don't find yourself having to go through an emergency conservatorship, because then that's where everybody starts fighting as well, because the conservatorship is really about stepping into the shoes of the person and effectuating their decision making. What lay people see it as is a money grab. It's a control. It's an opportunity to stop the bleeding if you didn't like the lifestyle that your parent was living with the non-bio parent, and so you can sort of secure what's going to come to you. And it sounds horrible, but after almost 30 years of this is what happens.
No, this is exactly
so all you have to do
what
is
we
these
see
documents
on a daily basis, especially in a wealth management practice. And I've had clients for 30 years now. And so you have multiple generations, and you see sort of, if stuff's not properly sort of looked after from an estate planning standpoint, you leave gaps and opportunities in some of the best intended, relationships and families then sort of unravel, if you will, just with those gaps and opportunities where it wasn't clear.
And it creates problems for someone such as yourself and the accountant, particularly when you have tax deferred instruments and someone's at an age where they've got to be doing the required minimum distributions.
Oh, yeah.
Who's the client? Who do I have authority for? Can I trade? Can I file returns? Can I make these distributions? And then again, you've got to go to an attorney to petition the court to fill this vacancy.
How does the court determine the conservatorship? Is it like a family member that steps forward? Is it something appointed by the court that has sort of a bullpen of people that oversee that?
Yeah,
from a fiduciary standpoint?
You have two tests. There's one, is there a need? Is a person to be adjudicated incapacitated because they lack in a variety? There's a questionnaire that is a judicial form that a physician has to fill out, and it's about 6 pages. And they have to go through all the different areas of decision making, from everything from personal to medical to financial to estate or testamentary capacity. And then the court does have a ranking of who is in a position of priority. So a spouse would have priority over an adult child. An adult child would have priority over a sibling. And so you sort of go spouse, adult child. If you don't have that, then you're going to be looking at a parent, siblings. And so in that, then you may have a battle of, we're in the same category. And so then it's who's the most appropriate person. If someone has committed a crime, or if someone is a creditor or a debtor with the person to be conserved, not the arrangement that a court wants to put in place. If it looks like someone was mismanaging funds, not the person. If the person needs a lot of hands-on and someone lives in Alaska, but there's someone here that's closer in California, not that geography should dictate, but sometimes the court might consider this person's going to need someone to look after them. And so that's the better person to appoint.
Well, I know in my conservatorship or mental capacity, if you will, I think I have in my own estate plan, we have, 2 doctor's notes, not just one?
Yes.
Just to be sure.
Some people create within their trust a very elaborate panel. And so we try to make it not, but when you have these family businesses, legacy issues, blended families, sometimes someone wants to make absolutely certain. So they'll have 2 physicians. They might have their financial advisor, the best friend that they grew up with. And if everybody says that, and I have a situation that I came into, I'm not representing that person, but the person who they named as a successor, and their estate planning attorney was like, I don't think we need to be making it all that complicated. And he's like, nope. And then the situation arose and everybody on the panel was like, yep, he can't be in charge anymore. Okay. And he picked a good person, his son-in-law, who's like, I think he was a CEO of a major corporation. And he's doing everything right, but it's still difficult for him to let control go. But yeah, it's important to make sure that it's not just, hey, if my spouse thinks or my daughter thinks, you really should have a physician weighing in some way.
That's good.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of interesting information about Jimmy Buffett in the news and issues with his financial advisor. Do you want to share more about that situation?
Sure. So that's a situation where we do a lot of counseling when someone's choosing a fiduciary. So in the trust circumstance, that's a trustee that will succeed you either when you lose capacity while living or upon your death. And then the executor is if somebody has a will and has any assets outside of that trust. And so in the Jimmy Buffett circumstance, and this happens often with spouses, if it wasn't the first spouse, if there's a lot of wealth, if they're blended children in the family, if the spouse may have money management issues, and someone will name someone else other than spouse or have a spouse have a co-trustee. And in this circumstance, the longtime financial advisor who would know all the books, who would know what their spending was the one that's named. And it's not going well. A lot of times the surviving spouse is left with a standard of the lifestyle that you grew accustomed to. And that's usually what was the spending the last year or two of the person who died. What were you enjoying? And then having an ability to penetrate more for what we call HEMS, which is health, education, maintenance, and support. Sometimes it's without regard as to what's outside of that particular trust that the surviving spouse is a beneficiary. So, in this circumstance, she might have her own assets she may have come to the marriage with, or she may have income. And so sometimes trustees are set, they have to look at what are your outside resources, either principal or income coming in before you're penetrating anymore. If you've grown accustomed to, I don't know what it costs to be me, whatever I want, I get. And then someone starts putting, tightening the belt, pulling the leash, whatever, analogy you want to use, it doesn't typically go well. And that's a lot of my litigation cases are either there's someone overseeing it or there's someone controlling it. And so that's the problem that's existing right now. A further aggravation in that situation, which often happens, is this person's also taking what we call trustee commissions. And so a lay person, we always say, although it's not defined in California, whatever the principal that you come into that you're managing, 1% a year is really all you should be taking. When you go to a professional, it's higher. Some have fee schedules that are agreed upon when they agree to start doing it. And so a lot of times people don't like that because you're telling me I can't go on my 8th vacation this year, but how much are you taking a quarter?
Keep the corpus of the assets intact for your fee as you oversee that conflict of interest, right?
Right, exactly. And sometimes, a trustee may have, what is next after this lifetime beneficiary? Do I need to be thinking about what's the legacy or what's the long-term intent of the testator? Is it just to keep the surviving spouse accustomed to the lifestyle and make sure all his or her needs are met? but also children, grandchildren,
Right.
legacy planning. When I'm investing and what I'm dispersing, and I know that you're spinning off $6,000 a month over here from a pension from your job, why do you keep asking me for this money? And so that takes very sophisticated planning and language so that the trustee and the beneficiary are on the same page and are very clear about who's a priority. Because sometimes we'll say the lifetime beneficiary surviving spouse is the priority, even if they exhaust. And so that kind of then gives the trustee a bit more flexibility and takes the heat off the trustee for the remainder beneficiary that come after. But it's a mess right now.
Interesting.
Yeah. Spouses don't like being babysat when their other spouse dies. And that's kind of what the arrangement is. It's better than what I have had. Never a good idea to have the stepdaughter be the trustee of the stepmom.
Oh, man.
When you die. Don't make that choice. It will go to litigation.
Oh, wow.
So, but at least
1,000%.
it was a professional in this case, even though it's not going well.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Schein Wealth Management, serving the Coachella Valley for the first 40 years and built for the next 40 years. And for more information about Schein, it's scheinwealthmanagement.com. Valerie, let's go into another celebrity estate. How is this information public? Like, celebrity estates, how is this information, like, we're supposed to have trust, we're supposed to have all this sort of buttoned up so it's private, right? And, Aretha Franklin had her very public as well, estate issue out in, TMZ news every night. So how does, first of all, I guess the one question is how, if you try to do everything to make certain that your estate plan is private, how is it public? And how do we know all this information about all these celebrities?
So I think, with Aretha Franklin, I'd say Lisa Marie Presley, Prince, what's common among those three is either, in the case of Prince, no planning. So, the cobbler's wife with holes in his shoes.
So no estate plan whatsoever.
No. Unless they
no
found
will.
something, that's what was in the news. Do I know personally what Prince did? No, but that was my understanding of what's been there. The same was believed to be the case with Aretha Franklin, but that's a case of if you do documents, you should have them in a secure location, whether that's a safety deposit box, a fire safe box. Everyone knows that this is where you keep your important papers.
This was hers.
That's her will. Yeah.
This was her will. This
Yeah.
Reportedly, right? They found this was her will in
along
her couch.
along with like coins and lint.
Just in case. That's a good, nice
Right.
little handy spot for it.
Right. And so, as you know, I have a pretty strong policy about I want to keep original documents
Yeah.
because there's also a threshold that you have to meet if someone can't produce original documents in some circumstances.
That's a good point.
So that was a case where sloppy bookkeeping and not really having an established attorney, you would think at that level there'd be an attorney really, I am the attorney and here are the documents, or that people would have known. And then in the case of Lisa Marie Presley, of unclear documents. So you have documents, but the changes that you make create confusion. And so in all three of those cases, the reason why we know about it, probably because they're celebrity and you've got, the sensationalism and everybody wants to be in their business, but it's because there's lack of clarity, lack of structure, and therefore you have to go to court
to
get
fight it out.
So if you don't have assets in a trust and they're above a certain amount, you must go in California to the probate court and open up a probate, and it's a year-long process. If there is absence of direction, but someone believes that there's something, then you have to go to court to get an order to direct how to take care of things. And then in the Lisa Marie Presley, if there's confusion, then you have to petition the court for instructions so that whoever the fiduciary is knows what instrument to follow, or if there's language in any of the instruments, gives an interpretation so the trustee isn't exposed to liability and trying to figure out, well, I think this is what it means. And then one beneficiary is like, that's not what I think it means. And so then you get in a battle. So that's why they are. If you do it appropriately, that you have all your assets in trust, that you have all your fiduciary positions named, and that the people actually do fulfill them and don't decline or resign or aren't around, and that you have them in a secure spot that's known to someone else. It's easy to have a law firm or a financial entity or a CPA firm because those hopefully will be ongoing versus only one person knowing where something is. So that's why they end up being public and why we know.
That's really good.
Valerie, I haven't quite reached the phase in life where I need to have a full estate plan, but when do you think people should start thinking about it? Are there any steps or mindsets that people should take before they actually need an estate plan?
Yeah, I think when someone turns 18, they should, because now they're not under a natural guardianship with their parents, they should have a healthcare directive and a financial power of attorney in case something happens. Maybe you're not thinking in capacity, but when we're younger, there's kind of a higher risk of us getting in some sort of accident. We're not as good drivers.
Right.
The younger generation, sorry, but you're distracted. So there's a greater incident of a car accident. We think we're invincible, really, I think until we're 30, and then you get in an accident, you're like, ooh, that hurts more. It takes longer, to recover. So I think those are important. I think if you're going away from college and you're going to be somewhere that it's not as easy, just, your daughter as an example, Rob, it's important to have them, particularly if you want someone to be able to assist you. So if you have a medical situation that you want your parents to be able to have information and help you make a decision, if you want your parents still to be part of financial decisions with the college, or you're starting now trying to invest money, that would be important. I think the first instrument on the other side of estate planning would be a will. So until you get kind of like to $250,000, you don't really need to have a trust because you're not trying to avoid probate. There are other ways to do it. You can do beneficiary designations, transfer upon death designations. If there's a home, you can do a transfer upon death deed record or have someone else on title that it would just naturally go to them upon your death. So there are ways that you can do that with your estate planning, your financial advisor, to figure out how do I keep myself out of probate. And then I think when you marry, there's different considerations. Most times people are looking at, if something happens to me, it goes to my parents. Then you have a spouse. Once you have a child, then you may want to leave some sort of legacy for your child. But also, what if something happens to my spouse and I, or if you don't have a spouse and you're a single parent, who's your guardian? If something happens to you and you have a child, you have 18 years until that person would be in charge. And do you want money set aside for care? And, I can't forget the animals. If you have animals, then
fur babies.
Yeah. What provisions are you going to do for their care? What kind of money are you setting aside? And so I think it's kind of as you have milestones in your life, adulthood, going away to school, growing your own personal wealth, getting married, having children, if you get a medical condition, once you start having people die, in your life. So once your parents aren't there anymore, we all rely on our parents, no matter how old they are. And we get to a point where we're like, should we still be having that person as the backstop? So it's an ever evolving in the same way that you guys would be working with your clients about what makes sense as you're an adult, what makes sense when you're in your first job, what makes sense then when you're looking at amassing wealth, wanting to invest in property. What if you start caregiving in these, what do they call it, sandwich generation, that you've got parents while you're still raising your children, and how does that impact things? And then you're also trying to look at, when do I want to start slowing down? What's my horizon in terms of what do I need to do now if I want to only work 10 more years? And then what does my retirement years look like? So to Rob's point earlier, I think once you start doing planning, you need to not forget that you have a plan, because you do need to evolve. And so when you have minor children, your focus is different. When you are then looking at young adults and you want to preserve something for them, that might look different. When, I'm sorry, but I don't want to be jaded, but when they marry or they have children, you may want to put certain guardrails in for that. And it's not about, do I like someone? Do I trust someone? It's about what your plans are for what you've grown and how you want others to benefit. So it's a constant evolving situation. And I think the more that you see in the headlines, the more you should learn and reflect upon your own situation. And when I say headlines, it doesn't necessarily need to be anyone who's famous. It's your neighbor.
Yeah.
It's your in-laws. It's looking at, we just travel. I can't be on a plane in a Uber without someone bringing up to me that something's going on because of lack of planning.
Right.
Or that someone has inherited a family business, or, there's a younger ag generation that's coming up and they're educated, they have had their own careers, and then they need to look at if they're the last invested generation because their family, their parents, their grandparents created this, how do they make it an ongoing concern when their kids don't care? They're not invested in that kind of thing. So I just think there's so many life stages that people need to look at. But I think 18, you should do something.
Right.
Yeah.
There's always Mr. Deeds. So Adam Sandler movie this weekend, and immediately estate planning, they had all buttoned up. They figured it out. No one that they knew directly, and they bring him in. And he turned out all right. That's proper estate planning right there for your family business. So Valerie, Madison, we had a wonderful discussion here today, and thank you, Valerie, for being our guest here today. We're going to have you back many, many times. This is just a start. There's so much more to learn, to know, but I think the most important is for our audience to understand that, like, you got to start today. If you don't have a plan, have an action plan, obviously financially speaking, and from an estate planning standpoint. We understood the sort of the importance of that, and you don't have to be famous, right, to to start, or even start one day, start day one right now. So Valerie, thank you for coming in today.
You're
and
welcome.
Thank you to
Thank
our
you.
audience, and Madison, always a great job as always.
Oh.
Thanks, guys.
And as we always do, we have a couple quotes to end the episode. The first is by Napoleon Hill, and it reads, "Don't wait, the time will never be just right." Our second quote is by Susie Orman. "Estate planning is an important and everlasting gift you can give your family, and setting up a smooth inheritance isn't as hard as you might think."
Or is it?
Mason. Very good.
This podcast is brought to you by David Field Producer. It is produced and directed by David Field and Kristen George. And it's mix, edit, and socials by Kristen George. Blanky Schein Wealth Management is a group of investment professionals registered with Hightower Services, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with Hightower Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is not indicative of current or future performance and is not a guarantee. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data and information referenced herein are from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analysis, prices, or other information contained in this research is provided as general market commentary. It does not constitute investment advice. Blanky Schein Wealth Management and Hightower shall not in any way be liable for claims and make no expressed or implied representations or warranties as to the accuracy or completeness of the data and other information, or for statements or errors contained in or omissions from the obtained data and information referenced herein. The data and information are provided as of the date referenced. Such data and information are subject to change without notice. This document was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of Blanky Schein Wealth Management and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates.